The Seattle Seahawks have made a bunch of cuts to get down to the new 85-man roster limit. We'll break those all down in just a second, but first, today's show is made possible by Magic Spoon cereal. You guys should cut out the not great tasting or not healthy cereal by getting the best of both worlds with Magic Spoon. $5 off your first order at magicspoon.com/Seahawks. Get your box or 4 today, folks. It is indeed delicious. The Seahawks roster cuts are just the first of several they have to end up making. The 85-man roster limit deadline imposed on August 17th. We'll break down those cuts here in just a second. The 80-man roster cuts August 24th, and yes, we'll do a video on that. And then the final 53-man roster due on August 31st. So let's run through the 6 cuts Seattle made to get below and the guy they signed to get back to the 85-man limit. First up, running back Cameron Scarlett. He gets the cut over maybe a Josh Johnson instead. Not a huge surprise. Scarlett ends up not being on this team. A Stanford guy, spent some time with the Panthers previously. He never had any shot to actually make the 53-man roster. All these guys who got cut were pretty much competing for maybe a practice squad spot. Unfortunately, not going to be the case for Scarlett. The main 53-man roster battle at running back is still there. Carson, Penny, Dallas, who's gotten some decent work with some injuries to minor injuries, other guys. Travis Homer, Alex Collins, the fullback, Nick Bellore, who I'm sure will find a way to get cut and then re-signed immediately, as the Seahawks always seem to end up doing right there. But Scarlett was the first of several cuts. Now, as I mentioned, we will do news videos for you guys each day that the team ends up making one of those roster cuts to get down to the upcoming roster limit. So, if you want that video, and if you want more videos here on Seattle Seahawks Today, all you have to do is hit that big red button and subscribe. That way, you won't miss out on anything here with the Seattle Seahawks. Next up, one of the receivers, and there will be plenty of receivers still to be cut because there's a lot of them right now on this roster. Anthony Ratliff-Williams, formerly of North Carolina, at least a little bit of a name, but much like Cameron Scarlett, despite playing at a Power 5 school, wasn't in the mix to make the 53-man roster. This was a player who the team had kind of brought in later in the process, and he didn't impress enough to stick around. In fact, the team had cut Darius Robinson and then brought him back and then chose to keep him through cuts, instead releasing Anthony Ratliff-Williams. There are several receivers still on this roster. The names to keep an eye out for this next round of cuts next week, kind of more along the lines of the likes of a Tommy Tovian, a Robinson. I don't think Thompson or Fuller end up getting cut at this point, but that is certainly one worth monitoring. We'll see how Dwayne Eskridge ends up making an impact in year one amid his own kind of injury concerns around that front. I remain a big fan of Kay Johnson and Connor Weddington. Those two names, though, are fighting right now for maybe one of the back end of the roster spots. As mentioned, today's show made possible by Magic Spoon. Magic Spoon is very high in protein, 13 or 14 grams of protein in every bowl. It's also incredibly low in carbs, only 4 grams of net carbs per bowl, and it is sweet and delicious. It tastes like the cereal that we as kids grew up with, but unlike that high in sugar stuff, there's no sugar in Magic Spoon, and it actually still tastes great. So go get $5 off your first order at magicspoon.com/Seahawks. That's magicspoon.com/Seahawks. Another offensive player here, Lukayus McNeil, who, again, kind of a later pickup and wasn't really making any impact. Played at Louisville, so a common trend there of the 3 offensive guys who ended up getting cut. Those were Power 5 players who never really ended up making much of an NFL impact. He also did not play in 2020. All 3 of Scarlett, McNeil, and Ratliff-Williams had played previously in the NFL to an extent. They'd been on rosters. They were not ever regular season guys, and they were not really going to make an impact. The offensive tackle spot, frankly, doesn't miss a beat with McNeil released, right? Abuehi, Champion, Shell, Brown, Jones, Forsythe, all players still on the active roster. There's more than enough depth, even with Dwayne Brown still not playing games right now for the Seattle Seahawks, as he not participating in practice in preseason, not that he would anyway, as he deals with his own little contract situation. Now, Seahawks fans, let me know in the comments section, how many years have you been a Seahawks fan? I'm very curious. I don't think we've ever really asked this of you guys, but I'd like to hear from you. How many years have you guys been cheering for the 12s? Get your votes in for me right now in the comments section. Defensive time now. Walter Palmore, he's been cut as well by Seattle. A backup fringe roster defensive tackle. Not much of a surprise, really. The four guys so far, not big. Oh, wow, they cut him? Nah, this one made a lot of sense there. Played at Missouri, just the one tackle for Palmore last year. Bounced around the NFL throughout his NFL career. Chance he gets picked up by somebody out there on the free agent market, but I think at this point, even though he's only 25, getting near the end of the line for Palmore as an NFL player. Yeah, doesn't really impact Seattle short term. For the preseason games still to come, it means more reps for guys like Latimer and Nikinbichi and Miles Adams and Gerard Hewitt as well. There's been a heavy trend in recent years of Seattle finding a way to get a UDFA on the 53-man roster. We'll see if Hewitt can keep that trend continuing. Next up is Nate Evans, and this is the one of the two that I go, oh, they actually did cut him. Now, it's not because he's like a great player or anything, or I thought he was going to make the roster. I never thought Evans was going to be on the 53-man roster for Seattle, but it's a linebacker release that made me go, interesting. UCF player, young player, again, did not play at all last year despite being around the NFL with the Jags, as you can see on screen. But the release of Evans surprises me because this team is not that deep at linebacker. Now think of what you've got coming up in the second and third preseason games, right? You're not going to play Bobby Wagner. Maybe you give Jordan Brooks a series or two, but he's not going to play a lot. So that leaves Aaron Donkor, Williams, Cody Barton, Ben Burkerve, and John Radigan as your linebackers. I thought Seattle could have gone a little bit deeper at that spot and kept Evans for a little bit longer. So does it impact the long-term side of things? But I am a little bit surprised that they chose to move on from him quite so quickly. Finally, Jordan Miller, and this is the most surprising of them all. I'd heard some good things about Miller and Seattle and how they felt about him. Former Falcons corner, was at college at Washington, so a bit local there. One tackle last year in 2020. I thought he was a long shot to make the roster, but of the 6 guys the team cut, I thought he had the best chance. And in fact, I'm pretty sure I was putting him on my practice squad projections. Well, those are impossible to predict right, so I'll take the L there on Jordan Miller. This team still has plenty of depth, though, at the cornerback spot between Reed and Witherspoon and Desir and Flowers and Randall, and even now Will Sunderland, Brian Mills, and Gavin Hellslop, who now are in position to really make a push, not so much for the 53-man roster, but to make the active roster. Those guys, Sunderland and Hellslop, are very much winners from the early roster cuts. So which cut ended up surprising you guys the most? For me, it's Jordan Miller, but it's not like it's a huge shock. These are not the best players out there. It's not like he cut a big-time player, like, say, the Saints cutting Prince Amukamara, for example. So get your votes in. What roster cut surprised you guys the most? Now, remember, had to get down from 90 to 85. They got down to 84 to sign Alex Tchangam. That is a former UDFA out of Colorado. Bounced around the NFL in 2020. He went undrafted. He's only played football briefly. He was a soccer player and then junior college in 2018, then transferred to Colorado. And, we'll see if he ends up making any impact. I don't want to be mean. I don't want to do that kind of stuff to guys who are getting to live out their dream. But there's really no chance Tchangam makes the 53-man roster. Could he be a practice squad guy? Sure, maybe. I think that is within the realm of possibility for Seattle. But I also would not be surprised if he ends up getting cut this time next week when Seattle makes the trim down from 85 to 80.